This segment and the next segment show two different perspective ways for ethical critique to happen in gaming, along what I'm going to suggest are the same lines it happens in the Iliad and in the Odyssey. The first one is going to be an in-game example, and this is an example from Fable 2, but what you'll, I think, understand as you think about it is that there are many, many games that have analogous examples.
Why I haven't got an engagement ring.
That was someone who wants to marry my character, which is in itself obviously a kind of ethical choice. The one I'm going to show, though, is a little more obvious. And so we'll cut to the Temple of Shadows. As I was saying, many games present similar ethical choices to this one. That is, within the story of the game, are you going to do something that would be thought of outside the story as being evil, or are you going to do something that would be thought of as being good? And so it's that kind of choice presented fairly starkly that we get in Fable and in a lot of games like Fable. And then one of the things we can talk about is the different sorts of choices that exist in other games. For example, in Halo, do you try to save the various weak Marines who are around you, or do you just go on through and allow them to be slaughtered? All right, so I need now to head to the Temple of Shadows. Now approaching the Temple of Shadows. That exclamation point means that the person standing there has a quest for me. Unfortunately, it's an evil quest. And appropriately, it starts to rain.
Excuse me, madam. Can I interest you in joining the Temple of Shadows? Ah, not one to blabber inanely, I see. We have a fair few of your disposition among us. Yes, you'll feel right at home. Ah, excellent. You have to swallow every last bit, you know. The feathers, the bones, the beak. Oh, excuse me, please.
What he's asking me to do is to eat 5 crunchy chicks in front of him, which is obviously the beginning of a slippery slope towards a life of evil, which is something that you can choose in a game like this. Fable 2 is certainly not the only one that presents a path of evil and a path of good. Fable 2 is a little bit better in terms of the nuance. In other games, one has to be more or less all evil or more or less all good if you want to follow the path. Most famously, there's a game called Bioshock that we'll be talking about in the Community and Polis module, which is very much about that and whether it's possible to make that kind of choice. So what you can see is that there are many in-game possibilities for making choices that have a kind of ethical critique to them. That in itself is, I think, a lot like what we see in that first song of Demodicus, where the choice is presented of being a cunning warrior or a strong warrior. But you might, I think, justifiably think that it's a little bit toothless in a game like this, where there doesn't seem to be a lot at stake, and it doesn't seem to have that much to do with the real world. Which is why in the next example, what I'm going to be talking about is an interesting ethical interpenetration between game world and real world.